hello, ladies. I'm going to give you the notes today for worksheet 1.3. You're going to need out your worksheet along with your calculator, all right? What we're looking at today is how to get the calculator to draw for us those graphs that we did by hand in worksheet 1.2. So on your calculator, I want you to pay attention to these buttons at the top of the screen. We're going to be working with these buttons. We're going to be calling them out a lot. And the second important button that you're going to see is this one right here. It's called the variable button. It's got an X and a T and a couple of other variables on there right next to the alpha key. And we're going to be using that key a lot today as well. Okay? All right. We're going to graph it on our calculator using what's called the standard window. We're going to draw a decent sketch, and a sketch being something pretty low key. And then we're going to use the trace feature to do our table of points instead of having to do them by hand. All right? So the first thing is we want to graph this equation. So this equation, f of x equals 2x minus 3, is the same as y equals 2x minus 3. So we know that it's going to be a line. We're looking at graphing y equals 2x plus 3. You're going to go to the y equals button, upper left-hand corner. You should get this drop-down menu, y equals. And at the y one, we're going to type 2. You're going to go to that variable button, which is beside the alpha key, to get your x, and then plus 3. So yours looks just like this. Whoops, it's supposed to be 2x minus 3. Sorry. Fix that, 2x minus 3. Making several mistakes. There we go. All right, let me just start that one over again. 2x minus 3. Sometimes it's better to just start over. And then we're going to graph these graphs at the beginning in the window called the standard window. The button is zoom. It's at the top of your calculator. Press the zoom button. And you've got a bunch of choices here. The one we're going to work with primarily is the standard button. So push number 6. And you're going to get this X and Y axis that is right in the center of your screen, goes to the left and the right, 10 units left, 10 units right, 10 up, and 10 down. And then you're going to get your line, the graph of y equals 2x minus 3. Okay? Your goal now is to try to reproduce the way that that graph looks on the window that I've given you on your worksheet. Okay? So you'll want to make sure that you started at about the right place. Make sure your x-intercept and y-intercept are kind of in the right place, and that you come off of it in the correct place. So when you draw this, I'm going to draw one that's not okay. That's too low. Right there, that's too low. So try to make sure you get it about right. You don't need to get out a ruler. That's close enough. You can put arrows on the end of it if you want to, but you're not really required to. All right? So that's it. We draw it, and we try to reproduce it. We're working on our spatial visualization and spatial reasoning skills. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is use the trace feature to fill this table in. Instead of punching numbers into the calculator, we're just going to have the calculator do that for us. The trace button is at the top of the screen, also top of the calculator, trace. And basically, trace is asking you, what x do you want me to plug in? Right now, it's at 0, -3, but I'm going to tell it the x that I want it to plug in. The x I want is -3. You see it pops up there by the x. You hit enter, and it tells you the y value right there. So that point, -3, -9, is on this graph, and you can throw it into the table. As long as you don't push any other buttons, you can just go straight to the next x value that you want. You don't have to push the trace every time, as long as you don't touch anything else. Hit 0 and hit enter, and it takes you to the second point that I asked for in the table, 0, -3. And then again, the third point, this time 4, hit enter, and it takes you to the third point. So the work on your notes should look like this. And you should have something about the sketch looking very similar to what you see on your calculator. And you should have a note here about using trace, and then type in the x value, hit enter. And you may want to write yourself a note that says that you don't want to touch any other keys as long as you want to keep finding points. If you hit another key for any reason, then you have to hit trace to get your next point. Okay? All right, take a look at the next one. So from your work on worksheet 1-2, you should have a general idea of what this graph is going to look like. It's going to have an endpoint, and it's going to go either up or down, it might go left or right. It's going to have one endpoint, and then it's going to be kind of just a curve. Okay? If it doesn't look like that, we know we've made a mistake. All right, y equals. And make sure you clear your last equation. If you don't, you sometimes get bits and pieces left over from a previous equation, and that will mess up the one that you're working on. All right, 2, you can put times if you want to. Second, on the x squared key to get your square root button. And 4 minus, remember the x is up beside the alpha key. You're going to use that a lot this year. I always like to come out from under that square root, but I think in this case it doesn't matter. Every time you start a graph, we want you to get in the habit of using Zoom 6. These particular graphs have been set up to show what we're looking for in the standard window, so you want to get in the habit of doing that. Okay, so there's your graph. Now, if you have if you want those color calculators, your graphics are probably a little sharper than what I've shown up here. My line looks kind of like a little stair step. It's just that the calculator is an expensive calculator, but it is a very inexpensive computer. So the graphics on mine are not quite as good as the ones the color ones that some of y'all are using. Okay. Also, there tends to be a little difficulty right at the end point of this. And until Mr. Gill and I talk with you more about how to know where the endpoint is, we'll give you a little bit of leeway on that. That endpoint actually comes all the way down to the x-axis, which is how we're going to draw it over here. But sometimes that's off just a little bit because of the graphics of the calculator. So your graph, the endpoint is about like this, and it looks like it went that way. And we do want to try to mark that endpoint. Okay. If you're in doubt, we have tried to make the first point in the table the endpoint. I think we managed that for every problem. So when you go to do your trace, and you type in the numbers in the table, 4, 0, oops, do that again, 4, and then it tells you that it's 0, that's just a little bit more information that tells you that even though this particular picture doesn't show it very well, that actually goes all the way to the x-axis, 4, 0, type in 0 for x, and it will tell you the y value is 4, and type in -5, for x, and it will tell you that the y value is 6. All right. Again, you know what it's supposed to look like. We're telling you that we're going to try to put the endpoint in the first spot, at least for a while. So that helps you to know that that's got to be 4, 0 has to be on the x-axis. All right. The next one. Here we're going through each of the different kinds of graphs, each of the different parent graphs. Number 3 has an x squared in it. It's got an x squared in it. We know that we're going to get a parabola, and that means it either opens like this, looks kind of like a smiley face, or an upside down, so it looks like one of those two things. And we're going to let the calculator just tell us where it is. So y equals, clear this out first, hit the clear button, and then type that problem in, x. Press the x squared key and you get your exponent on there. It's always nice to double check that that cursor does not stay up with your exponent, which does happen if you use this exponent key, you will end up with your cursor up in the exponent, which can mess things up. So x squared minus 3x plus 4. And again, we want you to get in the habit of hitting Zoom 6 every single time that you start a graph, at least for a while. And there we go. There's our nice parabola. Okay. So when we draw this parabola, we want to make sure that this low point right here is in about the right place. We want to make sure that this y-intercept is in about the right place. Okay. So it looks something like this. And I want to give you a word for this low point. This little point right here is called the vertex. And that's the low point or the high point of a parabola. It's also going to be the low point or the high point. If you just look ahead at number 4 for a second, you know it's going to be a V-shaped graph. And we also call that low point, that high point, the vertex. So we don't have to call it that low point and that high point. Okay? All right, once again, we're going to trace. and put in the actual values that I've asked for. 0 gives us the answer 4. 1.5 gives us the answer 1.75. You can put that in the table, but I also want to show you how to change that to a fraction. So I'm going to go through it, and then I'll go through it a second time, and you can write the steps down. So if I tell you that I really want this to be a fraction instead of a decimal, here's what you do. You go back to the home screen. That's second and quit, which is right beside the second key. The word mode, quit is above it. So go back to the home screen, clear all of that off. And you need to pull up that number that was there. Now, I know that one was easy to memorize, 1.75, but sometimes they're going to be really long, lots of digits, and too hard for you to remember. And so what I want you to do is get it out of the calculator. So the calculator has taken that number and put it in memory compartment Y. The name of it, oh, it was, oops, sorry, it was the wrong place. On the window, if I do the trace again, trace 1.5, put this one away. You can see right there, it tells you where it is stored. It is stored in memory compartment Y. So we just need to call that memory compartment up. And we do that by using our alpha key, type the alpha key, and go down to the bottom of your keypad, and you will see the Y is above the number 1. So we hit the alpha key, and then we hit the 1, and it says Y. All right, you are telling the calculator, go to memory compartment Y and tell me what's in there, hit the enter button, and it tells you 1.75. That way, if you've got one of those really long ones, 2.44444444, it goes on forever, it'll pull that whole number up for you. And then you can do what we've already learned, math 1, and it will change that into a fraction. Okay, 7/4. So either one of those answers is fine. 0.4, 1.75, or 7/4, and you might want to make a note that you do a quit. All right, you do a quit, and then you do alpha Y, which is above the 1, and then you do enter, and that's going to give you the decimal. Make sure you have the right decimal, and then you do math 1. And that will change that into a fraction for you. Okay? Now, because I've hit some different buttons, if I go back to this and I just type in a number, it's not going to, if I go back to the graph, zoom 6 again, if I go back there, and I just type in a number, it's not going to trace for me because I have gone away from that. So you have to hit the trace button again to get that third one, and that is tracing 3, and we get the answer 4. So that your table's all filled in. Okay. All right, for number 4, what I'm going to do is ask you to do this. I'm going to pause for just a second and let you try to get that one in by yourself and see if you can do all the steps that you need, and then start the recording back again. Let me give it just a pause for. All right, we know this is going to be a V shape. So let's see if you got this one right. The absolute value key was in the math button. Oh, oops, I forgot to get clear. Y'all see how I started typing on top of the old one? That almost always will mess you up, so I need to clear and start that over again. Okay? 6 minus math. You go to the right number and type a 1, and there's your absolute value bars. And I left something else, and I have to delete, go back and get my 0.8. Then my absolute value bars. I always want to double check it after you typed it in, so you make sure you haven't missed that decimal or forgotten the 8. And once again, we want you in the habit of using the zoom 6 as your starting window every time. And what you'll notice is our V is not symmetric like some of the other ones we saw. It really is. It's just that the rest of that V is over here, and you can't see it right now. So that's okay. Your job is to draw what you see. So you want it to look like when you draw this, I don't even have to change the one here. When you draw this, you want this to start sort of in that same place right there. Okay? And you want your vertex here to be over in the second quadrant, about there, and you want it to then come out right about here. That's the way you want it to look. It should look very similar to what you see on the screen. Your goal is to reproduce what you see so that it has a similar look. All right? And then in your tracing, when you did the traces, these came out as decimals. Decimals are okay. You'll use decimals a lot in your physics class. If I really am insisting that it be fractions, well, we'll get used to that as we go through the year. When it has to be fractions, when decimals are all right. Okay, that's our 4 parent graphs. We did a line, we did a parabola, we did a square root, and we did an absolute value. All right. So I have 2 more, just because there's some interesting things about punching these into your calculator. Number 5 is going to be a line. There's no square root, there's no x squared, and there's no absolute value. It's going to be a line. But typing that in has caused people problems in the past. So I'm going to write down the 2 ways you can type this in. There's actually 3. I'm going to show you 2 of the ways you can type this in. 1, you can type y equals parentheses around the numerator. You're telling the calculator, do the numerator first, and then a fraction bar divided by 4. That's the way I do it. That's the way I learned to do it, and that's the way I do it almost all the time. The second way you could do it, I think you should have room above this. I have to go below because my pen writes so large. The second way you could do it is you could separate this. There were some that in your notes in one of your review sections about separating a fraction. So you would write -3/4 x plus what 28 divided by 4 is 7. So that's the second way you could do it. That works fine also. The third way is to use that function button that we saw for fractions the other day, and that's the way I'm actually going to choose to do it this time, but these 2 are fine. So the other way, the third way, the way we are going to do it today is to use the template button, which is F1. All right? So go to y equals, marks on the page. Be sure to clear your old one. Do alpha F1. And there's your fraction template, and we want the first one, number 1. And then you're going to just type the whole numerator right straight into that numerator. -3x plus 28. And then your denominator is 4. So it looks just like it does on the paper. Okay? Zoom 6. And there it is. You want to try to reproduce that on your paper here. Then you want to do your trace. The 3 values, -4, write down 10, 0, write down 7, and 8, write down 1. Now, usually at this point, I find that some of my students are not using the trace button. They're just plugging numbers in. That's great. It's a wonderful skill to have that you can do that, but you're not always going to be able to do that. Sometimes these numbers that I'm going to ask you to find are going to be very difficult arithmetic, complicated, long arithmetic, so you need to make sure you have this ability to get the calculator and get that for you. All right? And the last one of these is f of x equals 4. And that's just a reminder that that's the same as the equation y equals 4. You should know that y equals a number with no x in the equation at all is horizontal. Okay? And that means that we could really graph this without our calculator, but what we're working on today is graphing with the calculator. Later, we will put together the 2 skills, with and without, and you'll get to be making some decisions. So we'll make sure you see how to graph a horizontal line. Go to y equals, clear out the old one, and you just type in a 4. The most common mistake is for people to feel like they have to put an X in there. If you put an X in, it won't be horizontal and it won't be the correct line. So y equals 4, zoom 6, and there's our horizontal line right across here, about halfway up, not quite. Halfway up would be 5, so almost halfway up. And honestly, you can trace for this one, but you're going to get the same answer, because what does y equal for every single x that you put in? The answer is 4. You should trace those to just make sure. Okay, in class, we took a short break here. If you want to stop and go back over these and then get ready to come back, we just have a few more examples to do. This is a good place to pause and take a little break. Okay, so moving on to part two, we're going to look at what about changing the window so that we're not always using that window that goes to 10 in every direction. So just a reminder, I said this at the beginning, that the standard window, when you hit Zoom 6, is going to take you out to the right 10 units, to the left 10 units, up 10 units, and down. That line in should say -10. You want to correct that, down 10 units. Or if you think about it without the box around it, just with the regular X and Y axis. To the right, we have a maximum that we're going to see, X max. To the left, the lowest X value we're going to look at on our pictures is X min. The highest number is Y max, and the lowest number is Y min. When you do Zoom standard, we're all going to look at the same window. Everything goes out to 10. But for many graphs, you're going to need to change that window so you can see the important critical features of the graph, right? So right here is a list of the critical features that we want to see when you're looking at a graph on our calculator. If you have a linear function, you have to see both the X and the Y intercept. So if you get this picture and your graph looks like this is your window, then something is there, something's not showing up, and I would need to change a number. And that's what we're going to work on for the next few. Okay, for both the quadratic and the absolute value, you have to see the vertex, the y-intercept, and the x-intercepts if they exist. Those are the same thing. The vertex of the quadratic is the curve, and of the absolute value is the point. And you just have to make sure that you can see that point. That's really important, as well as the x and y-intercepts. Sometimes you can't see x-intercepts because, let me just give you an example. Here's a V-shaped graph, an absolute value graph. And you see that this goes up forever, and it never goes back down to touch the x-axis. So I can't see the x-intercepts because there aren't any, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay? For a square root function, we have to see the endpoint. That's super important. You have to see the endpoint and x and y intercepts, again, if they exist. Sometimes for a square root function, it doesn't have either one. So there's a nice little square root function, and it goes up and to the right. It never goes back and crosses the y-axis, and it never goes down and crosses the x-axis. So let's go through an example of each one. All right. The first one, g of x, y, g of x, f of x, doesn't matter, equals 12 minus x. So y equals, clear the thing out, type in 12 minus x. And as a starting point, ooh, this is going to be wrong since I had 122, 12 minus x. As a starting point for each graph on this assignment, start with a standard window. We've created them so you can see what you need to see with a standard window. So there's our graph. Now, what I suggest in your notes is that you put a little image over here on the side of what you saw in the Zoom 6 window. This is for your notes. You don't have to do this for your homework. This is what you saw. And then you can look back at your notes and remember how you made these decisions. Where is the x-intercept? Well, the answer is the x-intercept's out here somewhere. So we need to change this number, which is the x max. We need to get in and change the x max. Where is the y-intercept? And the answer is it's up here somewhere. So we need to get higher up. That means we also need to change the y max. Okay? All right, where do you change these numbers? Oh, I forgot to say this. Do you notice that I did not put the x and y axis in Israel, and I didn't put the x and y axis in the box here? That's because they're not going to be in the middle anymore. You're going to change things. It's going to look different. So if you have already drawn the x and y axis in there, take it out. It's not supposed to be in the middle anymore. To change the x in and the x and the y max, x max and y max, you go to the button window right here. Go to the button window. And you should get this menu right here, X min, X max. And for our purposes, we will not change the scale, the X scale or the Y scale, and we will not change the resolution. So make sure you skip past those when you are putting your values in. All right. What I suggest is that the first time you try to change your window, that you change the number to 15 or 20. That will work for a lot of our problems at the beginning. Later on, we'll have to change them to bigger things. But for much of what we're going to do for the first part, if you change the X max to 15 or 20, it will probably work. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do X max is 20, and then I'm going to go down, skip all these other ones, and go to y max and make it 20. Okay? So let's see what happens here. Do not hit zoom 6 now. If you hit zoom 6 now, it will take everything back to 10 and you just changed it. So we want to now hit the graph button, which is up at the top all the way to the right. Hit the graph button. And look how the x and y axis are no longer centered. Okay? So now to the left of x we go to 10. This goes to negative 10. But to the right we go to 20, so it's longer. And the same thing here. This goes down to negative 10, and this goes up to 20. This is the picture we want to reproduce. Okay, and because we can now see both the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So that's the picture that we want to put on our paper. Scooch your x-axis down and scooch your y-axis to the left. And then I want you to tell me the numbers that you used. I used 20 here, and I used 20 here. You're going to label them right on the graph. I think 15 also works. I just have a tendency to usually go to 20 for my first check. And then you are going to draw the picture. Let me look at it again so I can draw it right. Looks like it goes a little more than halfway for y and a little more than halfway for x. So kind of like that. One of the things I like to do to double check does my graph look right is I like to look here. Did it go off the graph in about the right places? And it looks pretty close. Okay. All right, let's do that for each one of our parent graphs so that we make sure we know what we have to see. Y equals clear. Let me erase all my little circles. Now, negative 0.3. Make sure you're pushing the negative and not the minus. Parentheses, x plus 4, close parentheses, squared, plus 15. Always proofread. Somehow I got 155. Let's get rid of that one. Okay. And I'm going to start with a zoom 6. Okay, you knew this would be a parabola because it had the x squared, and you can see that the parabola goes up this way, it must go up there somewhere, and then it comes back down this way. So we are missing a couple of features on this. I'm going to take just a second to draw what I see here, just in your notes. You don't have to do this in your homework. It's a good idea to have it in your notes. What did I see when I did zoom 6? I saw this, and then I saw it come back down. And this should help you envision where you need to change the numbers. Obviously, you need to see something up higher. That's where the vertex is. So you need to change the y max. This time I don't need to go to the right, but there's another x-intercept over here. This just keeps going down, so I need to go back this way, and I need to change not the x max, but the x min. Okay? You go to window. You can do negative 15. A lot of people try negative 15 first. I just have a tendency to try negative 20 first. Either one of those is fine. I'm going to change my x min to negative 20. And I'm going to change my y max to positive 20. Leave everything else alone. Don't hit zoom 6. Hit graph. And you can see it has moved the axes over. And now I can see the top of my parabola, and I can see both of the x-intercepts as well as the y-intercept. And this is the picture that I want to reproduce on my paper. This is moved to the right, this is moved down, and my parabola, I need to double check, does it cross? I want to make sure that I get this over here to the right, that it doesn't cross through the origin. That's an easy mistake to make when you're sketching. So it kind of goes through something like that, over to the right. Okay? I also want you to always put in the numbers that you changed, and you put them right on the graph, right on the picture, so they're easy to find. This is a 20. This is a negative 20. Okay? Now, if you used negative 15 instead of negative 20, the picture would look just a little different. I think if you use negative 15, it kind of stretches over a little bit closer to the edge right there. That's also fine, as long as you can see it. We don't actually have to all do exactly the same thing. All right, 2 more. Absolute value graph. Y equals clear. Remember where absolute value is? When you get to the end of the 6 minus x, you need to push the right arrow key to come out of the absolute value bars. Minus 15. And start with the Zoom 6. Do not just hit graph. That will use the window from your last problem. You want to start with the Zoom 6 again because we have created these problems so that they will show you what you need to see in the Zoom 6 window. And hopefully you can see here. I'm going to reproduce that just for my notes so I can remember that this has got some interesting stuff down low. The vertex is down there, so I want to change the y min. And this rises back up. I need to move this way a little bit, so I want to change the x max. Okay? To change those values, you go to Window. You want to change the x max. Again, I'm going to use 20. This one I think I'll use 15, just so you can see it doesn't have to be 20 every time. Okay? And then I'm going to change my y min. And I'll try 15 for that also, negative 15. If you put 15 there, it'll get very confused. Okay? It needs to go down to negative 15. And now I'm going to hit graph, and let's see what happens. All right, I think that's pretty good. Some people might want this to go a little further to the right just so they can see the symmetry. And this is right at the very edge of the bottom. And some people like to go a little lower than that so they can actually see the vertex a little bit better. But this would be acceptable. So this time, when I draw my picture, it's going to go, oops, it's going to go down pretty much to the bottom right here. It's going to cross a little to the left of the origin here, and it's going to be almost to the edge over here, and that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for. Okay. That's not very good. I think I might draw that over again. It looks a little crooked. Those two V's should be kind of the same slope. We do give a whoops, that's not good because that does not go through the origin. Might be that I need to move that over a little. Something like that. Okay. All right, last one, square root. Square root function. Line equals clear. Put that little negative in first. If you put a minus, it will get confused. Make sure you put the negative. Okay, go back to a Zoom 6. Start every graph with a Zoom 6. All right, now here's the problem. We really are not completely sure where that endpoint is, but for the purposes of the next few assignments, all of our square root graphs are going to go to the right. So the endpoint is going to be to the left side. If we change that, I'll make sure that you know. So unless you're told otherwise, and until we can show you how to know where the endpoint is for yourself, let's always assume that the endpoint will be to the left and it will go to the right. Okay, if you get confused. And let's take a look again at that. So if I hit the wrong button. Okay, so if I know my endpoint is to the right, and my graph looks like this, I need to see that endpoint. I need to get over here. So I'm going to have to change that x min window. X min, I'm going to try negative 20. I think negative 15 might work for this one as well, but I'm going to go ahead and try negative 20. And that's the only thing I need to change, graph. And there you can see it better. If you're unsure, if you really want to double check, just go up to 20 in the right and the left, and then you can easily figure out where it is. So once again, the graphics are not quite so good. That actually goes right up to the x-axis. We're going to be pretty lenient about that until we teach you exactly how that works. So yours might look like this. Make sure that endpoint is sort of clear. The endpoint is really right on the x-axis, but that's not completely clear in this graph. Okay, your homework is 6 that are done on the Zoom 6 window. You just do the Zoom 6, and you're going to practice your tracing with your table, and then 6 that you have to practice trying to figure out the window.